Good afternoon. It is 4:45 on Friday, January 21st, and this is the Boozy Pundit. I'm going to give you some of my thoughts on the Joe Biden press conference. I believe it was 2 days ago. He held over an hour press conference to mark a year of his presidency, a wonderful year of Biden plodding around and doing what he can. And this was a press conference that was, well, I listened to it with great interest at first, but honestly, I couldn't get through it at some point about, I don't know, maybe 40 minutes in. It was too depressing. He really had no ability to spin sort of like a press secretary would be able to do live spin as the questions were coming in. Biden was, you could see the gears turning on some of the more difficult questions. It started off to the press's credit with fairly tough questions right away. Sir, Afghanistan was a mess, and the economy, inflation's terrible, gas prices, and your ratings are at 36%, and COVID-19 is still a problem. What is your explanation? And so he was immediately kind of on the defensive, which I don't know if they maybe expected the usual fawning press corps, as he was the one deciding on who to hear from, obviously. And I'm sure he was coached on that, but even those people couldn't avoid to sort of get into kind of the obvious questions of, like, this is not going well, sir. And so, in general, there was no faults admitted, nothing, everything went great. And he sounded positively Trumpian at moments, saying, I mean, he's really more and more Trumpian, and it's like, is this something that occurs once people get in the office? And he's like, there has never, he said something along the lines of, there has never been a presidency that more has been accomplished in 1 year. I'm pretty sure Trump said that exact same thing. Does Biden not remember, like, from when, I don't know, 4 years ago when Trump said the exact same thing? No one has done any more. Like, to at least Trump, that's the usual thing, the superlative that you would hear from Trump. Biden is just sort of a poor knockoff of Trump at this point in terms of his rhetoric, defending himself in certain things. So there was a lot of tough questions, a fair amount of tough questions, and it just, you could see the gears turning with Biden sort of in his brain, thinking, trying to recall something he had heard someone else say recently, whether it be a Republican or Democrat. Just anything will do. He's going into the memory banks. Hey, guys, you got anything? We got a Mitch McConnell quote. All right, go with that. And he would quote McConnell. And, well, even McConnell says. And it was almost, just as long as he could keep his sort of gums flapping, it didn't matter what was coming out of his mouth. And he was saying stuff that was totally undermining a lot of his other arguments, or just sort of jaw-droppingly, like, inappropriate, sort of. He was saying, like, it's okay when they ask him about Russia. If it's a minor incursion into Ukraine, we'll see what he sort of intimated that, like, we'll abide it's just a minor invasion. It's just only 75 tanks roll over the border, guns blazing. That maybe we can sort of talk through. And sort of like, wait a minute, the whole State Department's like, whoa, there's zero to do with, like, any policy we're pursuing, sir. I don't know, he was making stuff up as he went along, and this was a hot mess. So, but my primary take here that I have not heard anywhere else has to do with the most jaw-droppingly sort of, using the old definition of a gaffe in politics is when a politician accidentally tells the truth. In this, Biden was so kind of disarmed by and unaware and caught flat-footed by the difficulty of the questions that he was just telling the truth on some things. And they said, sir, So are you in undermining the integrity of the elections? Because basically, having to do with so-called voting rights. The Democrats are making a big deal, a hyperbolic explanation of voting rights and democracy in crisis and all of this stuff. This is just what more and more seems to be laying the groundwork for a midterm loss. Well, we lost, but that's because Mitch McConnell blocked voting something. Meanwhile, the voting, they didn't bother coming to the Republicans or anyone else outside of the party about the particulars of this voting stuff. According to McConnell, it's a pure partisan bill. It deals with stuff only, a typical type of thing, typical Washington partisan thing, hack fest, where it deals with only things that benefit Democrats and nothing that Republicans would want. And then they wonder why. Well, then they go and whine to the press. Look, why won't they help us? They're anti-democracy. They're against freedom. They're against voting for black and brown. Something to play the race card all day. Meanwhile, there could be actual, like, serious things that people agree on, like they were able to do infrastructure. They do have the ability to find things. Hey, idea number 1A, is this something we agree on collectively? Are there the votes? Yes, no. Okay, take all those things, vote on them. But they don't do that. It's sort of a lot of just parlor gamesmanship, I guess. So they put everything in there that they know won't pass. They won't get enough votes for Republicans. That's the point. Because they know it's going to. They seem to think it's not going to go well for them in the midterms, because historically that usually happens. And Biden 36%. Things basically couldn't be going worse in terms of what his accomplishments or lack thereof. And no one's happy. No one. They've tried their Saul Alinsky isolation tactics on Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema. They didn't go to them about what they would want. They just tried to browbeat them for literally a year, I think, or at least 6 or 7 months of let's just make fun of them and say bad things about them long enough, and then they'll just come around. We'll send all our minions out, and everyone will say how bad they are and how they're holding up everything. And it's a Saul Alinsky kind of torched earth approach. Everyone will get angry at them long enough to the point where they'll just capitulate. Well, and that hasn't happened. It's gotten worse. It's sort of like convincing an anti-vaxxer that they should take the jab. It's at some point counterproductive to continue with your sort of fighting fire with fire approach. You have to release energy, like Taoism. In order to get what you want, sometimes don't go straight for it, guns blazing, back off, and go the other way. Well, use reverse psychology. Well, I'm really. Either way, whatever you want to do, you'll make your own decision. And maybe you never know, you might get what you want. So they've tried that with those two Manchin, and it's not working. Basically, like I said, everything couldn't be going worse, and so they've got this voting rights thing that they know would not go anywhere to, and the thing that he said I couldn't believe. So he's been essentially arguing that even in the press conference he was saying that it's not clear that the election results will be valid, or something along the way. I'm about to get to the crux of the entire point that I was sort of trying to get to, but went on a bunch of tangents and kind of had to do some kind of exposition, background explanation. Okay, so during the press conference, Biden, he's been laying the groundwork for things to not go their way when they're in the midterms, and they've got this talking point, the latest, sort of a never let a crisis go to waste thing. And because there's a COVID-19 pandemic, let's decide that there's a big voting problem. which is essentially a non-existent problem if you examine the particulars. Last year, the ability to vote was loosened because of a pandemic, so all sorts of different things were to make it easier to vote. Sometimes unusually easy to vote, like they're pretty much short of mailing you like a vote, like mailing you a ballot already filled out, pretty much almost, and then just all you have to do is sign it. Like they've made it so easy. So Republicans wanted to go back to what things were pre-2020, and in some cases maybe tighten things up. You know, each state has different things, and you know, generally Republicans want there to be more stringent controls on voting. They, like, God forbid, show an ID. Let's just try to make sure the person voting is that person, but those are considered barriers to vote. You know, it's got to make it as easy as possible, no questions asked. Like, don't even ask the person for an ID, which to me is ridiculous. Well, asking someone get an ID, you know, hurts black and brown people or low-income people because, you know, they have no wherewithal to get an ID. So, or then there's libertarian concerns about the national ID, or these are just, you know, the government tracking you. So there's all kinds of problems with controls of, everyone's got their different take on voting, but suffice it to say that there is no major existential crisis, as Jim Browdy on WGBH calls it, to do with voting. Everyone's going to be voting fine. It's going to be fine. More people than ever voted last time. I don't see the problem. There's going to be plenty of access to voting. You have to be super, super lazy and dumb not to be able to vote at this point. There's no restriction, essentially, that's worth talking about, really. Certainly not worth this level of hyperbolic rhetoric and claims of it being an existential crisis. So, the question to Biden was, sir, are you saying that are you calling into doubt the integrity of the election? And he said, and you could see the gears turning. He's like, oh God, how do I do this one? And he goes, he said these exact things. It all depends on if we are able to make the case to the American people that there are enough problems with the voting. Basically, in so many words, he said, if we rhetorically can convince Americans that even though there isn't a problem with the voting integrity, that there is, if our sort of rhetorical buildup is sufficient, if our sort of obfuscation and sort of snow job about what's actually happening is successful, then we can, then we might be able to like get somewhere. Like, I couldn't believe it. Like, did I just hear that? He's basically saying that if they can make the case, if the Biden team, the administration, the campaign can argue successfully that there's enough problems with voting, then even though there isn't, enough people will call into question the results. I couldn't believe it. And anyway, so apparently Jen Psaki had to walk back a lot of the stuff, including minor incursion into Russia. But, you know, that one aspect, I haven't heard anywhere sort of unpack that. I would be very curious, what the hell was he talking about? Anyway, thanks for joining me, and have a good evening. Cheers.